So, we are getting on to the last part of our session with you all, and I'm going to invite Vic and Liz to come back onto the stage because we will do a Q&A. And again, we'll take questions from the room and any questions that have come in from Slido or Facebook or anywhere else once I get the iPad back. And we'll see how we go. And once we've had a little bit of time with Vic and Liz on questions, we will do the community awards that Vic's going to announce the winners of. Sorry. I am. Here comes the iPad. But does anybody in the room have a question they want to ask any of us as we start off? Looks like possibly. Let me have a look and see what we've got digitally. Not anything at the moment. Right, we've got a hand up there, Steve, and we've got some people coming back into the room as well now. Over to you.
Sorry, it's about downsizing. I get the impression, maybe rightly or wrongly, that there's quite a lot of houses under-occupied. Say for example, there might be one person in the 3-bedroom house. Are there ways that Curo could encourage people to downsize to allow those properties with more bedrooms would become available for families?
So the short answer is yes. We have looked at this over the last few years, particularly since the bedroom tax has become a thing, which potentially penalises people who live in houses which have more bedrooms than you could argue that they need. We have spent a bit of time encouraging people to consider downsizing for that reason, because obviously there's a big waiting list of people wanting homes right across our region and across the UK. And where the biggest problems tend to be is for bigger homes as well. There are very few larger 3-bed, 4-bed homes that become available through our lettings process. So if we can encourage people to consider maybe taking a smaller home, we can help them move and we can free up a larger home for a larger number of people. So that would be ideal. We can't force anybody, obviously, and it's not necessarily an easy thing to do. But the point you make is a really interesting one, because overcrowding is becoming a bigger and bigger issue. And I think we've seen that through the COVID period. That it's been interesting that people who have been more affected by the infections of COVID have lived in more overcrowded environments. And we need to try and do what we can to ease that overcrowding burden, but it's not easy. And we'd love to be able to do it and encourage anybody who's even thinking about it, contact us and we can do whatever to make it as easy as possible to find you somewhere that's really lovely, but maybe a bit smaller, freeing up a bigger home for a family. Is that okay?
Yeah, no, I just wondered how do you encourage people actually in practice? I mean, I know somebody was telling me that some authorities say maybe help with moving expenses, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's exactly the kind of thing that we have looked at in the past, and we can look at again. Indeed, you're quite right. We can do those kinds of things. It's a good reminder to us, because I know that Liz has been thinking about this from the board perspective as well, because overcrowding is something that I know the board are very interested in. So it's probably time for us to dust that off and maybe have another go at it.
Right.
Sounds like a good scrutiny review, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Mr. Bridges, just hold on for the mic, sir.
Hey, this has been a problem for years. I live in Elm Tree Avenue, as Vic knows, and at one time there was 4 widows in that Elm Tree Avenue, all wanted to go downsize, go into either a sheltered housing or whatever, and they weren't able to. In the end, all 4 of them got their family to buy their house, because they've been there for years, so they got a big discount from the council, and they stayed there till they died. So we lost those properties purely because there was nowhere for them to move.
Yeah, it's a great example, Keith, of the kind of thing we want to try and avoid if we can. So I think we'll be a bit more proactive about that in the next few years. To see
It means building more 1-, 2-bedroom houses. And I don't think it's going to happen. If you can put a 4-bedroom house up where you want a 1-bedroom house, you ain't going to do it. It's going to be a 4-bedroom.
Well, we always always try to build a range of homes for different sizes to meet local needs, and we've got. We're doing a consultation right now over in Radstock for Walnut Buildings, which we're looking to rebuild.
Yeah, I've seen that.
And that
yeah.
will be a combination of 1 bed, 2 bed, 3 bed homes, different types of homes. So yeah, we do try and work out what the local need is, and then build those sorts of homes rather than just say let's build as many big ones as we can.
The trouble is with Westfield and Radstock, if there's any vacant properties, Baines fill them with people from Bath. And that's been going on for years. We got more Bathonians in Westfield than we have people from Westfield.
Yeah, you may be right, Keith.
I'm right.
That's-
I'm not maybe. It's a fact.
You also know that the housing system is allocated by the local
Exactly,
authority,
yeah.
and that's not something that we can control. But
Pity.
yeah, it's an interesting point. Yeah. Sorry, Vic, did you want to add anything to this?
No, I think the whole idea of how we make better use of the homes we have is an important question. And it's not going to solve the housing crisis, but it will contribute to it. You know, when I was director of housing in London, it was one of the big ways because you simply, you know, if you imagine there's 3,000 on a waiting list here, in some local authority areas in London, there's 50,000. You know, the scale of the challenge is enormous. So making best use of the homes you have is a really important part of the strategy. You know, you heard earlier on Andrew talking about trying to identify unauthorised subletting. And typically, nationally, there's about 5% of all homes that are unlawfully sublet. So that will contribute because hopefully we'll identify and then remove people that aren't lawfully entitled to live in that property. So these are all contributions to making better use. There are incentives to help people move. There were at one stage, although I haven't read the policy for a wee while, incentives per bedroom released. So you would get a certain amount by each bedroom you release. So there were financial incentives. But what you got to remember, what we all got to remember, our home is so emotional that if you've lived there, you've seen your children grow up there, they've moved on, your partner passes away. The last thing you want to do is to leave that place which has been part of you for so long. So it's the money in itself isn't enough. And of course, what Keith's saying is very often people want to move to more appropriate accommodation. That's what I did with my parents in the end. It was heartbreaking, but it was the right thing for them to do, to move to accommodation that was going to be wheelchair accessible. But these are emotional issues as well as practical issues, and you're dealing with both the need of the individual and then the needs of families that are waiting in the list, and it's a really tricky one. And so I didn't say that comment, you know, trivially. I do think it's a conversation worth having with residents about how we make that journey and how we create more of an interest for that as a general alternative. There was, of course, the cost associated with the bedroom tax, which is not officially called the bedroom tax, but you know, but there was that was a sort of almost a government financial penalty to not under occupy. But this is a big challenge, and I think it's well worth a conversation with residents about how we begin a dialogue about how we support people. Because ironically, sheltered housing, of all the types of different housing we have, has the smallest queue. I.e., if we put sheltered housing vacancies up, they tend to have less demand than general needs housing. So I was surprised, Keith, when you said that some of those residents were unable to move at that time. It may well be it was at that point, but I know that it tends to be not as high as demand as some of the other types of family housing.
It could have been that living in Westfield, they don't want to go to Bath.
Well, that's the other thing. They want to move to a specific location.
Yeah, I mean, they want to stay roughly where they're too.
Yeah.
Which is another difficulty. But, I mean, that happened. All of them sold their houses through their family.
Yeah.
And then that is losing more stock. I mean, the worst thing that ever happened to social housing was Maggie Thatcher.
No comment.
I mean, she's the worst thing that happened to anybody.
Let's move on. Both of you
nobody's arguing.
Go on, Keith. Both of you have raised a really interesting point, and one that we're definitely going to be focusing a lot more on. We've I think, hold on, because we've got lots of people with their hands up at the moment. So if you don't mind, we'll have time to come back to you, definitely. Steve, I think the lady at the front was actually next, and I'm just going to pick up a question that's come in online. Oh, I'm going to try to. Someone has asked, is it your practice to force tenants to agree that a complaint has been completed when the remedy is unfinished? The complaint has gone on since 2011. Obviously, it's not our policy to do that. Our policy with complaints is to reach an agreement with you that you're satisfied with. And the starting point should be, what's a good result for you going to be with this complaint? And then we work towards that. And we don't close complaints until we've had the resolution agreed. So we will go back out to you and say, are you happy that we've done what we said we were going to do? And at that point, we'll close it. If that's not happened in your case, I'm very sorry. This is Mr. P, your initial. Get in contact with us and we'll have a look at it. We don't have records of any complaints being open since 2011. So something probably has gone wrong there, I think, because most of our complaints are dealt with within 6 months or so. But get in contact, or I'll get Leslie's team to do that, and we'll look into that one for you. So that one's coming in from Facebook. We'll go back into the room, and we've got a question from the lady at the front here.
What is your policy on a one-bedroom flat where people are disabled and they need a two-bedroom flat because they have to sleep separately?
So, I mean, in terms of our policy, we try not to have people in accommodation that's not suitable for them. So if anybody's in a one-bedroom flat and they need a two-bedroom flat because there's more of them than maybe there were originally, or their circumstances have changed, then we can look at that. It depends on what your circumstances are, where you live, which the local authority is involved, etc. We are able to directly move people from one place to another if it's an emergency, so we can do that, but we need to understand the circumstances really. The other thing that we do is, of course, we can adapt homes. So if someone's in a home and it becomes through an accident or disability or whatever, it's no longer appropriate for them, we can adapt that home so that it makes it easier for them to live in there. But yeah, without understanding exactly, it's a bit difficult to answer. I don't know if you want to.
I think it's worth just standing back from that example and to recognise that as housing has been sold in this country, there's been less and less. It used to be in the early, when Right to Buy first came along in the 80s, 32% of all homes in this country were some sort of social, rented, or council housing as it was once described. These days it's 17%. That complete erosion over those years has been entirely as a result of Right to Buy and the fact that we're not rebuilding those homes that are lost because the money that gets received isn't then put back into new affordable housing. So the fundamental problem is we've got less supply than we had in the past. It continues to go down every year because we simply don't keep up with the disposals. And the other thing is this, that because one of the requirements of all social landlords is that they're tied to local authorities and local authority housing need assessments, we are obliged to put all applications through that system. And the reason why I'm going to make that point is the circumstance you described is quite clearly important, really important. It's life, quality of life important. The local authority has this enormous challenge of assessing that important housing need with a rough sleeper that day, or with a woman who's fleeing domestic violence, or something else. These are really difficult decisions, and then inevitably they're trying to make judgments about need, which they shouldn't have to be. And very often what you're describing, which isn't an immediate emergency issue, gets further down their priority banding. And it's a tragic reality of our current housing system that we're ending up making these sorts of judgments. It doesn't stop the point that Paul made, which is we have a role to see if we can make life a little bit better, if we can encourage mutual exchanges with other tenants who might be wanting to downsize in that locality and make some adaptations. But it's important to understand that is such an important matter for the individual family, but there are so many other awful stories about other people that also need to move.
Thank you for the question. Just before we come to the lady next to you, we'll come to you in a sec, and then Steve, you can go back into the room because there are more hands at the back there. We've got a question online which relates to what Vic has just said, so hopefully, Jess, that answers your question too. We do have to look at what the local authority's assessment of housing needed in a particular area when we're building or acquiring homes. So that's why we don't have many three-bedroom bungalows like you've suggested. Let's go to the lady at the front here.
Yeah, you said you can adapt the property if the person needs a property adapted. How do you go about that? Because when I asked if I want the bungalow, I said, yeah, but I am disabled. Do I have to go through you or get an OT report? They told me OT.
Yeah, the OT, so the occupational therapist does need to be involved in that. So it's not something that we can just instantly do ourselves, particularly if it's a very minor adaptation, so something that might cost less than £1,000, we can do it. But if it's anything over and above that, we need to get an occupational
wet room I've
therapist
wanted.
involved, which means going to the local authority usually. And I know that that's been very difficult in the past year, and the waiting lists have been horrific, and we have been pushing, in Baines, we've been pushing very hard on that. I think it's just eased up a bit. But yes, it's not the easiest process to go through, unfortunately. The other thing is, what we've been pushing the local authority here on is, can we get a more visibility of all the different types of home that exist, i.e. ones that have already been adapted? Because what tends to happen annoyingly through the home search process is that a home that's been adapted will get snapped up by somebody who doesn't need an adapted home, and then we have to pay to take out all the adaptations, and then another home that does need to be adapted, we have to pay to put them all in there. And the lack of visibility in that process is not great, and we need to get better at it, but we need help from the local authorities too.
Okay.
Liz, I don't know if, because your other roles within the sector and other housing associations, I don't know if you've got anything more to add to this point.
There is more disabled facilities grant now than there ever used to be, which is a good thing. But there is this logjam because of COVID. It's one of the impacts. So, that does make it more difficult. But we need to work with the local authority and try and encourage them to speed the process up so that we can get access to those sorts of resources, and we do quite a lot ourselves, but there is disabled facility grant there, and people, I think the government recognises that it's a really important issue. It's just making the different pieces fit together to get the results that we all want.
Great, thank you. So lots of questions on the same sort of area, and I think we did have some more hands. Gentleman back there had a hand. I'm just going to pick up one more that's come through from Facebook because it's again relevant to this topic, which is someone says, June from Facebook is saying, your bidding system doesn't make it easy for someone who would like to move. It's not our bidding system to start with. So this is, if you live in Baines, then it will be Home Search, which is run by the local authority. There are other similar things in the other local authority areas. The housing associations, none of them run those systems. They are run by the local authorities. So the bidding is done on the local authorities portal via the local authorities rules. It can be quite complicated and it can take a long time. And we're really sorry for that, but all we can do is try and build more new homes and make them available to people, as well as turning around our vacant homes as quickly as we can. So if we go to the back there.
Good house. I've just downsized from Lucky Westfield to Meadow Court. I believe we need to build more Meadow Courts and slow down the building of houses. This will get people out, make retirement accommodation more available for people living in 3 and 4 bedroom houses on their own.
That's a really interesting comment, thank you. And we know Meadow Court well. So yeah, you may well be right. It's just a question of how much responsibility people want to take for the housing crisis and overcrowding, and how much we can encourage them to make the move that you've made, because it's obviously really helpful. And one of the other groups that we haven't talked about is refugees as well. So regardless of your politics, it's undeniable that we are going to have a load more refugees coming into this country because of what's happened in Afghanistan. We have a little scheme that we work on in Weston-super-Mare with refugees that come from Syria and Sudan. We will be taking some Afghan refugees as well because it's our responsibility to house people in the most amount of need. So there are all sorts of different challenges that people face in trying to find a home, and we need as many homes to put them in as we can find.
Thank you.
I think one of the challenges on specifically specialist schemes for older people in particular is that building specialist schemes is actually, believe it or not, the easy part, because the planning is slow, but when it's gained, you can build it. The issue about specialist housing schemes, it's for elderly or for other groups that need support, is the ongoing revenue that's needed to provide support for people in those particular specialist schemes. And that's what we found most difficult in responding to your point around why don't we build more of those, because building properties that in the end you can't actually let because the commissioning teams and local authorities have had all their budgets slashed is pointless. So one of the things we've been lobbying government to do is to recognise that It's short-sighted not to put the supporting funding into these specialist schemes, because people, particularly more vulnerable people, will cycle through the homelessness system all the time because they're not being supported into settled accommodation, and they can't sustain independent living in general needs. And in fact, Andrew, who's sitting here earlier on, a lot of the reasons he gets complaints about antisocial behaviour is lifestyle created by someone being vulnerable and being unsupported. They're parachuted into general needs accommodation without that right level of support, and guess what? They can't live independently. So government do, and we have been pushing hard for government to give local authorities more funding for specialists, including older people support.
Excellent question, thank you. We've got, looks like Mr. Bridges again. Do you want to take the mic over there, Steve?
St. Chad's. I went up there the other day. First time I've been there since it was developed, because I remember as an aerial panel we put a lot of fencing up to make it safer for them, and it was never ideally situated. And what's been done there is absolutely brilliant. The people who live there are really, really satisfied, and you've got a mixture, and it's great. But surely we got lots of other places like that which could be developed to become a similar sort of success, because that is a real big success.
Wow, Keith, that's lovely to hear. For those that
I
don't
didn't mention communications either, did I?
yeah, no money changed hands. What Keith is talking about is we had an older people's scheme, bungalows, that were, well, it's St. Chad's, and it had been built quickly after the war, as like many are, very small, come to the end of useful life. The biggest challenge we had was to try and sell the vision to local residents that it might not be brilliant, but they loved living there. And so, you know, getting the business case together so people went, okay, yeah, I'll move to somewhere else, was the biggest challenge, actually. In the end, as you say, what we did, we converted housing that wasn't really fit for purpose anymore. We moved those older people into better quality accommodation, and then we built family housing. And of course, back in the days after the war, sheltered housing, you know, they took up tons of space. You know, one bungalow you could build 3 terraced houses. So in terms of the land it released, we were able to put quite a lot of family housing in. But yeah, it's lovely to hear that you think it's worked out really well.
Thank you, Keith. We've got a few questions online again, so I'll return to them if there are no more hands in the room. I'm going to take probably the biggest one first, which is from Curo, who says, what about dealing with mould in homes? So we have talked about that a bit over the last 2 days, and it's undeniable that it is a problem in a reasonable proportion of our homes, and it's something that we take very seriously. We've been recruiting specialists into the business, and in fact we've just agreed to recruit another one, a specialist surveyor, and we need to take the leaks and damp and mould reports that we get, I think, a bit more seriously and deal with them much more robustly, because we realise what a horrible problem it can be for people. Now, it is the case sometimes that there are things that can be done to improve mould in a home, and that to do with ventilation largely, but sometimes it's not possible. Sometimes the structure of the home is what's causing the issues. And we've got real serious issues, I think, in a small number of our homes to consider how we get through that, because we can't just knock them down and start again, but it will be very, very costly to essentially rebuild the areas of those flats, it's usually flats, that have the biggest problems. So we're taking it very seriously. We've just, our senior team has just been looking at our damp and mould strategy for the year ahead. Matt, who's at the back of the room, is spearheading that, and it's one of the things that we're really focused on for the next few years. But please bear with us if you've got that particular problem. Do let us know, and we will do whatever we can as soon as possible. But it's going to be a thing that we're going to have to wrestle with over the next few years. Okay, and then another one that Liz, you might want to comment on too. So this question is from Verity, who says, we've got the results from the polls coming out. I actually got it wrong when I started the session this afternoon. We didn't have any polls today, did we? You might be looking at me a bit strangely when I said, get the thing out of your bag and fill in the polls, but we didn't have any. That was yesterday. But the polls from yesterday and from the other live events we've done this week, we're going to announce the results of that on Friday night when Vic and I do a Facebook Live. But we've also had all the questions and comments that you've raised over the past 2 days. So the question from Verity is, what are you going to do with all of that stuff? And how are you going to pick it up? So Liz, you might want to have a think about, from a board perspective, how you think what you've heard in the last couple of days is going to be fed back, and then Vic and I can talk about what we're going to do with this information that we've got from you from the conference.
Okay, well, one of the things that I said was that we really did want to get your feedback, and we did really want to make sure that we responded to it. So at a board level, which is, you know, the sort of overview level, we will be expecting a report that says, this is the list of the sorts of issues that have come up, and this is what we're doing about them. At a more granular level, I know Vic's got an answer to this one because we were talking about it earlier on. But you know, it is really important because we will lose credibility if we don't actually follow up and pick up all these issues and act on what you're saying to us. So we may not be able to get everything absolutely perfectly right because not all the issues are within our control. But we need to make sure that we have the systems in place that mean that all the feedback, all the polls and the results of those, that we do actually address those issues. Go on, Vic, you talk about the more granular side of it.
Well, what I was saying to Paul, what I think we need to do, we've had a lot of residents with very specific requests for work and things they need doing. So at a practical level, I think we need to pull all that together so we have a complete list of everyone, so we can, you know, make sure everything we've promised to do over these days are delivered. So that's a very practical thing. I think the second thing we need to do is stand back from that list and say, what are the themes emerging from that list? What are the things that are repeated in these requests? That means that we might want to look back and revisit some of our policies and processes and the way we work. So there's potentially some improvement. But ultimately, for me, the most powerful part of today is to remind you that we're here to serve you and that we want to work with you, and that today shouldn't be the only time that we have a conversation about how we improve things, and that you know that even though sometimes we make a mistake, that we're only a WhatsApp away, a call away, an email away, or whatever away from trying to make that right. But I think the power of a good landlord is when they stand shoulder to shoulder with their customers, with their residents, and there is a shared journey, knowing that the world isn't a perfect place. Things go wrong, but they understand what needs to be done in what order, and they're working together to fix those problems. That's the most important thing for me. The practical stuff will be done, but it's the culture that comes from these events that's the most powerful thing. And if I can ask you to take away the energy that we've seen in here and carry on, and we can carry on in this spirit of cooperation, that's, for me, the most powerful thing.
Excellent, great answers to that question. We're just about to come to the end of the time for the Q&A before we go on to the awards. Anything else from anybody in the room? Does everybody feel like they've had a good chance to ask Vic or Liz anything that's on their mind? So Tom at the front here's got a question, Steve.
Hiya. I know it's sort of addressed earlier about budgets and that you farm stuff out to contractors, private contractors. I'd like to raise a concern, as in shelter accommodation myself. We have cleaners, I use the word cleaners loosely, that come around and clean the blocks, which basically come around with a damp mop from the top of the stairs, bottom of the stairs, complaining about their boss having a go at them for not doing their jobs right, and going off with no wet signs or nothing in place, and the floor looks like a swimming pool, and it was like that for nearly an hour and a half.
Longer than that.
And the only way we actually dried it was have the communal door open to help dry it out. Is there any way you can address
But they don't
them?
clean all the landings. They only do from the top stair down to the bottom
Yeah, they
stair.
don't.
That's it. And they use the same water. Well, they don't put it in water. They use the same mop for all the flats.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that, and it's obviously not acceptable, and that's not what we are paying contractors to do on our behalf. What you heard from Carl and others earlier on is that we are looking to expand the caretakers model and to spread that out across all of our estates if we can. It'll take a little bit of time to do that, but that means Curo people will be doing all of those things, so we're able to manage them a bit better, because it is a little bit more difficult when you're managing a third party. But it's not good enough to hear that. There's a few people around who I'll pass that information on to, and we'll go and have a look straight away at that and see what we can do to improve it. Because I mean, it's not okay anywhere, but I think particularly in the sheltered accommodation where we're leaving wet floors, and that sounds very bad. I'm sorry about that.
In the window at the top, they've not even done in the window at all, have they?
Sorry
Or
about that.
by the cupboard under the top stairs, because there's a bit extra. They don't do that, literally. We do our own, don't we? 9 out of 10, we have to
Okay.
go over it.
I hear you. We'll pass that one on, and we'll make sure that gets resolved. Right, over to you, Keith, for the final time before we close the Q&A.
Could I ask where that's to? Because I am chair of SHAW, the Shelter Housing for the Older Person, and I would like to bring that up at the next meeting, which is on October the 13th.
I have asked if Tom can come on to meet me in my place so that I do.
Good.
Yeah, that's a good idea, Keith. We'll make sure
Yeah.
that we
Even
get that
better.
information passed through to you. Hopefully by then we may have done something about it anyway, but it's definitely
Well,
worth
yeah, I mean, that's
bringing
something
up.
we shouldn't all put up with. We've got shelter housing people pay enough money in as it is.
Yeah.
They don't want to have to do it themselves after it's been paid to do.
No, nor should you.
Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you everybody for all of your questions.
One more thing about the rubbish.
Go on, a question about the rubbish.
Why do the binmen always leave bins either outside against the road, up against the steps, and not bring them in anywhere but where they collected them from? And if you've got extra bags, because we've got a small bin, and we do a lot of recycling, but we cannot fit all the rubbish in the black bin because it's one of those small ones. I've asked for another bin, we got one, but then it was taken away because we asked for extra, the person upstairs does everything, 100% recycling, same as us. So 2 green bins, 1 blue plastic bag, and the 2 smaller black bins, we're overfilling, and they won't take it if it's not in there. And if we put it in the bin and it's overflowing, they put it on the floor and just walk out, and they turn around and say, we ain't taking it.
So I'll pass that on to Carl as well, because we need to know about these kinds of things. Obviously, they're not our bins and they're not collected by us.
Yeah.
It's the local authority.
Yeah.
But we can talk to them on your behalf.
Yeah, please.
And we can also have a think about, if you've got a bin store as well.
No, we haven't.
You haven't. Okay, it's
We-
just the bins.
We have got room that we could have them
Okay.
because
Well,
it's a piece of waste.
That's something that Carl can
You
maybe
know.
have a look at. He did talk about the bin store programme, and that does include putting new ones in when we don't have
Yeah,
them. So
because there's a
might be something we can look
93-year-old
at.
lady, bless her, and
Yeah.
she has to climb those stairs where the railings are a foot away from the stairs and too low and try and carry her bins down the steps.
Yeah, and we've said before we're going to come out and have a look at all of those things,
Yeah,
including the tree,
please.
because there's a few issues there, aren't there, that we
Yeah,
need to
there
try and
is.
tidy
Yeah,
up for you.
definitely.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm going to close the Q&A now, and so thank you ever so much for those questions. We genuinely want to hear them, because we want to hear what's important to you, and we will do what we can to respond as quickly as we can on all of those points, and we will provide a massive spreadsheet for Vic with all of the list of the things that we're doing to make sure we tick it all off. Can we please say thank you to Liz, who's going to leave the stage now?